This is what the Soviet Union was proud of for decades, its military program and above all, its long-range strike capabilities used to intimidate the West. At the same time, the origins of those very missiles made in the USSR were kept quiet throughout the entire existence of the regime. Naturally, such developments were classified, secret. However, as it turned out, there wasn't really much to hide, nor anyone to hide it from.
That's the kind of amusing space program they had in the USSR. The engine was German, the instruments were German, the actuators were German. The only thing that was ours was the equipment barrel, and even that is questionable.
The secret CIA archives lift the veil of time and provide a clear understanding of how the USSR operated and from whom it stole ideas.
According to various estimates, the forced evacuation to the USSR affected about 25,000 people.
It also explains what the modern Russian missile program is all about, with all its Yars, Sarmat, and of course Oreshnik missiles.
There was nothing particularly frightening about its use. Here's a gyroscope from the Oreshnik. Even Yuri Gagarin flew with one like this.
We will tell you how the USSR, taking advantage of the work of Hitler's engineers, claimed their achievements as its own. Was Gagarin's flight really the achievement of Soviet engineers? Why does Russia, even after a century, still use World War II technologies? And to what extent can Putin's current missiles be considered modern? You can find out all about this right now in the new episode of Arsenal. So, the pioneers of the rocket industry in the world are rightfully considered to be the Germans. It was under the auspices of Hitler's Germany that the future of global long-range weaponry was born. By the end of World War II, the engineers' work resulted in the V-1 and V-2 rockets. After the fall of Berlin, there was literally a hunt for German rocket specialists by both the USSR and the USA in order to obtain the data from those very developments.
The main problem for the Soviet intelligence services was the lack of specialists. The key figures of the German rocket program in Peenemünde surrendered to the Americans, along with tons of valuable documentation. On the Soviet side, it is said that from among the high-ranking members of von Braun's team, only Helmut Gertrup, who headed the Guidance and Telemetry Systems Laboratory, ended up with them. He did not want to join his former boss and surrender to the Americans, preferring instead in September 1945 to join the Raab Institute in Bleicherode, which had been organized by Soviet intelligence services. He made his choice largely guided by material incentives and the prospect of staying in Germany. This is exactly what the Soviet intelligence services promised him.
Stalin set the task of obtaining at any cost that deadly weapon which had nearly destroyed London with its monstrous strikes. The V-2S impressed the Soviet leadership with their power and the possibilities they opened up. A rocket never seen before.
It was used as a means of intimidation, mainly striking the civilian population. The bombardments mostly targeted the territory of Great Britain, especially the city of London, which stood out for its large area. According to a 2011 BBC documentary, the V-2 attacks resulted in the deaths of approximately 9,000 civilians and military personnel. And another 12,000 workers and concentration camp prisoners died as a result of their forced participation in weapons production. The rockets traveled at supersonic speeds and fell without any warning sound. It was impossible to stop them as there was no effective defense.
However, after the war, when the US and the USSR acquired parts of the German rocket program, they took completely different paths. One side invited the specialists, provided them with everything they needed, and began joint work on developing new types of rockets. The other side simply stripped all the equipment they found. They took the people and dragged them behind the Iron Curtain to figure out unfamiliar technology.
After the war, the Soviets gained control over the production facilities. The V-2, they restored V-2 production and moved it to the Soviet Union.
According to archival data, the people and equipment were placed in the small town of Gorodomlya. There, on a territory surrounded by water and barbed wire, the so-called NY-88 was established.
According to various estimates, about 25,000 people were forcibly evacuated to the USSR. Specialists in aviation, nuclear energy, rocketry, electronics, radar, and their family members. General Serov was put in charge of this, and he later became the head of the KGB.
At the same time, as the rocket engineers of those years admit, Soviet engineers simply did not have enough knowledge. That's why the task was simply to replicate what others had already created for them.
As for those challenging early years, we weren't just simply making V2S. We actually had a very strict government decree for it. Despite some strong objections from Korolev and several of his close colleagues, we were explicitly instructed to copy the German V2 rocket exactly, right down to the very last rivet. But we had to make it entirely from our own domestic Soviet materials.
At the same time, let me remind you, to the Union, at that time, specialists from literally all branches of rocket engineering were brought over. Experts in aerodynamics, guidance systems, electronics, and so on. Soviet people could only dream of such things. But here, everything was explained to them clearly. Maybe not the first time, but eventually everything was laid out and made understandable.
Practically everything that had never existed before. In the USSR, they were given a tremendous wealth of knowledge. German specialists in the USSR at that time.
When the V2 was copied, Soviet engineers simply claimed the development as their own, naming it the R1, and later began to modernize it. Obviously, to prevent information leaks, they stopped working with those very Germans who had taught them everything. The Soviet security services got rid of their colleagues, fortunately simply sending them home rather than executing them.
The organization of German specialists located on Gorodomlia Island was given the status of Branch Number 1 of Research Institute 88. It was here that the foundation of the Great Space Age was laid. The rocket developments of the German specialists were redirected to the Moscow region, to Research Institute 88, which was headed by none other than Korolev. By adopting and improving upon the experience of their German colleagues, the USSR soon carried out its first successful launch of a rocket assembled in the likeness of the V2. The need for the work of the German rocket engineers disappeared, and they were sent back to their homeland.
After that, attempts began to add something Soviet to the well-tuned German mechanism.
At first we flew around the Earth, then we started sending unmanned probes to the Moon. A small modification to the rocket was needed. They lengthened something, basically. And the rockets started to crash, one after another. And again, they decided that somewhere in Kazakhstan there must be a sniper sitting nearby. And with a sniper rifle, as the rocket lifts off, he shoots and hits it.
Wait, was that really a serious theory?
Yes.
What year was it when the rocket started to crash?
It was when we started launching to the Moon. At first we were just trying to hit the Moon. Without any instruments, without anything. And even then, we missed.
You couldn't hit the Moon? Did the spacecraft just fly past the Moon?
They installed a longitudinal vibration meter. And it turned out that after making this small adjustment, the disturbance frequency and the rocket's natural frequency matched.
So it was a technical error?
Absolutely.
No sniper involved?
Yes.
By the way, it's worth recalling another major achievement of the Soviet Union, sending a human into space. So, without going into details, the prolonged attempts to create engines for the Vostok 1 spacecraft ended in complete failure. Once again, it was the Germans who saved the day. The engines from the V2 rocket were combined into a single system, and it was on those engines that Yuri Alexeyevich flew to explore the universe.
As you can see, the answer, it's obvious and quite clear. What engines did Yuri Gagarin fly on? On engines from the V2 rocket. Yes, only there were 20 of them.
Returning to the present day, we can confidently say that all modern Russian ballistic technology, like missiles, Yars or Sarmat, are still echoes of the developments of those very same German specialists. Ukrainian specialists found yet another confirmation at the impact sites in Oreshnik in the Lviv region.
There was nothing particularly terrible in terms of use. Here's a gyroscope from Oreshnik. Even Yuri Gagarin flew with one like this.
While examining the fragments, engineers found dozens of missile parts that were still made in the USSR, which means they were made using German technology.
They found vacuum tubes, old Soviet ones. Everything here is old. Old, like this one here, for example.
So it turns out that all the new Russian stuff is just well-forgotten, old imported technology. At the same time, all that Russian Federation engineers are capable of is increasing the warhead and the range. Basically, those are all the upgrades that happen to Russian weapons. Weapons made in Russia still haven't managed to step into the 21st century. Did you like this video? Then be sure to give it a like and subscribe to our Arsenal channel. The link is in the description below the video.